I believe we are now live. So, hello and good afternoon to all our attendees on Zoom and Facebook Live. My name is Boon, and I'm the Research Director of KSI Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific. And on behalf of our institute, we'd like to welcome you to our second webinar entitled Identifying and Filling the Gaps in Social Safety Nets, Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic. Over the past months, we have experienced a tightening of the economy due to the effects of the COVID-19, as the government scrambled to implement the pre-13 stimulus with the intent of protecting individuals and businesses, complementing Malaysia's existing social protection programs. We have seen our own social protection system stretched and tested to the brink. While many were able to benefit from these initiatives during the past month, we also seen that not many were able to tap into these welfare programs. Individuals, families, which were also supposed to receive financial aid, may have lost out due to the lack of an income tax file. In KSI's webinar just last week, we covered briefly on how some SMEs and micro SMEs were not able to tap into pre-13 because they were not registered with SSM or do not have a company tax file, or perhaps not even a business license. This is a situation known as the informal sector. The lack of recognition has prevented them from receiving grants or access to loans such as the Special Relief Facility. While there's plenty of blame to go around, whether it is a fault of these individuals or businesses for not wanting to register or conduct businesses properly, or the government's fault for the lack of stringent enforcement, which allows these informal businesses to thrive, or the fault of all of us as consumers who are giving businesses to these operators providing a demand. So it creates a culture of enticing more unregistered informal businesses to set up. In any case, society as a whole needs to share the blame. More importantly, society as a whole needs to come up with viable solutions to ensure that we are put in a position to protect everybody properly. We must also remember that these social safety nets are for. What's the purpose? It is the basic right of any human being to be given the opportunity to make an honest living and to do life. Sometimes in the midst of making an honest living, there will be some who will be left out with no other options due to situations beyond their control, such as a loss of a job or deteriorations in health. This is why the pandemic is a perfect storm, as it comes with a double combo punch affecting both our work and health. Many want to contribute back to society by going back to work or by volunteering, but simply are not able to. These conditions may not only have been inflicted upon themselves, but to those who depend on them. These individuals are put in a vulnerable and desperate position and may not have a way out. This is the reason why it is important for us to get our social safety system correct. With all players involved, the state, the private sector, and the third sector, NGOs and civil society, all of us must play a role in giving a lifeline, an opportunity to bounce back as long as people put the effort to. These systems are also designed to ensure that years from now, when we retire, we can reduce financial burdens on our loved ones and those around us, because we cannot expect life to be smooth sailing all the time. So some contingencies need to be made. The COVID-19 pandemic has put the spotlight back into social protection capacity in Malaysia. These issues did not emerge exclusively thanks to the pandemic, but has been present much before. So it's timely that this crisis has given us an opportunity to reevaluate Malaysia's social safety system. So today we are here not only to look at the political dimension of the social protection system, nor do we want to delve too deeply into the welfare state debate, but we want to hear the views of those actively looking at policies, working with affected communities on the ground, as well as those carrying out these social protection programs. Our speakers will compare how our social safety systems to those overseas, look into those issues faced by individuals and communities on the ground, and also share ways how we can resolve some of these issues to move forward. Therefore, I am very honored to have a panel of very distinguished speakers. And on behalf of KSI, I would like to thank Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, the Senior Fellow of Ideas, Puan Balqais binti Yusoff, the Head of Strategy Management Department of the Employees Provident Fund, Mr. Kon Onsian, Managing Director of Yayasan Kajian and Pembangunan Masyarakat, and Mr. Mark Yoge, who's the President of FIABCI, FIABCI Malaysia. For all of them for agreeing to speak in this webinar to provide us with the insight on how Malaysia's social safety system can move forward and be improved further. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our moderator for this webinar, Surveyor Michael Gay, who is also the president of the Malaysia chapter of FIABCI, the International Real Estate Federation, who will be setting the ground rules and taking us through today's discussion. So Mr. Gay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Voon. Am I clear?
Yes.
Am I clear on my voice? Yeah?
Very good.
Clear?
Very good.
Yeah, okay. So you said I'm very honored to be appointed by Kingsley to be the moderator today. And we focus on today's topic is identifying and filling the gaps in social safety nets and lessons learned from COVID-19 now. So if all our speakers, we have very, very qualified speakers in their own field. First speaker is Mr. Kon Un Sen, Managing Director of Yayasan Kajian dan Pembangunan Masyarakat, YKPM. Over to you, Mr. Kon.
Mr. Michael Gay, for the introduction. Good afternoon, all, and I hope you all are enjoying your self-imposed home captivity. I'd like to start with two stories of the Orang Aslis. We've been doing some food distribution over the last few weeks. One village we went to, one family walked an hour out of their forest to come and get food aid. Now that was a bit worrying for me. That means the forest is not providing adequate resources for them or even social nets. Another village I went to, or about to go to, and asking about what are the needs there. And they were telling me that they have run out of their cash reserves, their savings, and now half their men have to go into the forest for 4 days to look for food. And so what this shows me that these are showing the existing fault lines of our current protection nets. And so many of our small scale producers, and many of them have 1-2 acres of oil palm or rubber, it has shown that the MCO or lockdown has restricted traders and transportation into these villages, and therefore they have lost their sources of income. So that's number one. But secondly, it shows that the ecosystem of their social protection is also inadequate. The forest, which was once a source of abundance, is now not enough for the Orang Asli, largely because much of it has been logged. It was a place where they could get all their food, their fresh, clean water, safe drinking water, their animals, their proteins, their forest vegetables. They all were adequate for their lives. But with deforestation, it is now no longer there. And it has impoverished the Orang Asli in ways that are not fully appreciated by the current strategies. So the current economic development strategies, I want to give you a little bit of backdrop of why they are so vulnerable, because how these ecosystems have made them so vulnerable, and why the once used to be adequate social nets for them in the forest are no longer available. In the last 20-30 years, the economic development strategies has largely been helping them develop oil palm plantations and schemes, giving them jobs and dividends. It involves probably cutting down 6 acres of forest and then planting with oil palm or rubber trees. But the end result is it only gives them a dividend of 500 a month and a loss of their forests and their natural resources. And the end result is non-sustainable incomes and destruction of their trees and their natural environment. On another count, oil palm is also not as effective as a means of helping them, as it does not provide food security. And it's further made worse when you are dependent on commodities like oil palm or rubber. At times of crisis, these prices tend to crash due to the lack of demand. And so not only are they suffering from lack of their natural resources, now they're suffering from loss of income, low income, and savings that are inadequate to carry them through. And as a result, they are suffering from lack of access to food, clean and safe water. Even at this time, I've noticed some of the social aid that is being provided, like Bantuan Prihatin, is not actually getting to the Orang Asli. Because social prihatin requires each of them to have been subscribing already to a SOXO account or to have set up a business. Many of these Orang Aslis do not have either. And so even this aid is not able to reach them effectively. So in short, the current development policies of oil palm plantations and schemes and destruction of the forest has left the Orang Asli very vulnerable, especially in times of crisis, and already impoverished even at the best of times. And secondly, the lockdown, as a result of the pandemic, has made it even worse for the Orang Asli because it shuts down their access to markets and income. Traders can't come in to buy the rubber or the oil palm, and therefore they are left without any income at all during this period. And thirdly, the social aid provided through Bantuan Prihatin, for example, is not getting to the Orang Aslis simply because they do not have SOXO accounts. May I also add that the rural farming community are also in a predicament, particularly the small-scale producers. With the lockdown, markets and supply chain systems have broken down. The morning markets, the night markets are all shut down. Restaurants have to shut down. So a source of their markets, a huge part of their markets, have been cut off as a result of this lockdown. And the farmers are finding it that they are no longer have their traditional markets available, and they're having to dump their produce. So that's a major issue. And many of these small-scale producers do not have much savings, and they do not have enough cash flow to last them through 2 months of lockdown. To the credit of the government, Pharma and the Agricultural Department tried as quickly as they could to create central distribution centers to mitigate this effect. But nonetheless, a number of small-scale producers have already been badly affected, and it remains to be seen how well they will be able to recover from this crisis. So in summary, it shows the current marketing and supply chain system is not able to protect the rural farmers from such shocks. But also more worrying to me is that the existing supply chain system is not creating an adequate supporting ecosystem for rural farmers to be sustainable. I like to quote you an IFAD article. Economic growth in agriculture is 2 to 3 times more effective at reducing poverty and food insecurity than growth through other sectors. And so as a result of that, support for small-scale producers are actually quite critical. So what is the way forward? And there are 2 parts here. One is to invest in areas to reduce the vulnerability and to create better ecosystems. Secondly is to design social protection measures that actually reach the Orang Asli. Okay, number one, in terms of reducing vulnerability, it's better to develop, strategies to develop food security, economic activity. At least even with a crisis and even with a close down of markets, they will still have food. And secondly, to promote economic activity or products that have fair prices rather than commodities that are very fragile and sensitive to market demands. In terms of social protection, social nets that can be accessed by the Orang, designing social nets that can be accessed by the Orang Asli. I would think instead of the, there was 25 million that was set aside through JAQUA in terms of food aid. But when we did our surveys and looked at it, many of them were dried food, and so they still lacked fresh food. So one of the common requests made by the Orang Asli is, can they have more fresh food? So maybe a cash support might be more effective than just food aid through a fixed budget. And because 99% of the Orang Aslis are in the B40 category, I think it's also good to just open it across the board and create cash support given directly into the accounts. Finally, in terms of policy recommendation, okay, firstly, I think there's a lot that can be done to reduce the vulnerability by investing in development, particularly of infrastructure, roads, storehouses, and digital connection so that they can enable them to connect to fair markets. Number two, recognizing their land rights so that they can develop their agriculture and their agro businesses. Thirdly, in times of crisis, to increase cash handouts across the board and channel it directly to the Orang Asli. And then they can use the money in a more suitable way to their needs. And finally, invest in small-scale agriculture to jumpstart the recovery and provide the vital support to these marginalized small-scale producers, because they are, and IFAD and some of these research bodies are showing that it's quoting 2, 3 times and even some 10 times more effective in reducing poverty among the rural community, creating jobs for the young with such a strategy. So post-COVID, post-recovery, investing in small agriculture, jump-starting it, I think would be a very, very good strategy. So that's it from me. Thank you. Oh, and can I hand it over back to you, Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Kon. Yeah, a very detailed insight. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow, Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, Ideas. Over to you, Dr. Carmelo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael, and thank you to KSI for the invitation. I'm very pleased to speak this afternoon and to bring my contribution. Before I start my presentation, just allow me a brief introductory remark. You will never hear from me in this scenario the word pandemic with a reference to Malaysia or Southeast Asia and COVID-19. Pandemic is a word of Greek origins. Pan means all, demos means people. Democracy is the government of the people. So all the people. So far in the whole Southeast Asia, COVID-19 has killed 0.00028% of the population. So it is a problem, but it is not a pandemic. And probably the government, including the Malaysian government, rushed too fast into a lockdown. Today we had the new data about unemployment, a jump between February and March from 3.3 to 3.9% in just 1 month. And the lockdown started in the second half of March, the 18th of March. So probably the Imperial College study that was used to implement the lockdown was never questioned enough, and a serious analysis of the trade-off implied in the lockdowns was never properly done. We are all experts here, but remember that experts fail and experts can say silly things, and at the very core of scientific development is to keep on questioning the opinions and the findings of the experts, including my own findings. So from here, I go into my presentation. Okay, I think you can see it. Here there are some data about myself, including my email address, if someone wants to get in touch. So which social safety net for Malaysia? Malaysia has a very unique business model that makes a bit complicated to find solutions that could be applied easily to the entire economic system. It was mentioned before the importance of the informal sector, and a lot of businesses that are not registered. Then even among the registered business, most of them are small and medium enterprises. But we have also a very important role for GLCs, government-linked companies, and somehow private corporations in the middle. So the scenario is quite complex. In today's presentation, I will focus only on two proposals for social safety nets, because social safety nets are made of different elements, and we cannot discuss everything today. So I will analyze, the main part of the presentation will be focused on temporary unemployment solutions in case of emergencies. And I will spend just a few words on the importance of social housing. So let's go into the first part, temporary unemployment solutions. And in order to discuss this, I will make a comparison with the system that is in place in my home country, which is Italy. Because, you know, in this part of the world, we tend to look at Europe in search of models to imitate, but not everything that comes from Europe is necessarily good or better than what we have here. And I will take as an example the temporary unemployment system in Italy, which is called Cassa Integrazione Guadagni, or Revenue Integration Fund, which has several pros and cons, and I would say more cons than pros. First of all, the so-called CIG is not valid for all the economic sectors, and it is not applicable to firms and businesses that have less than 5 employees. And keep into account that Italy, like Malaysia, has a strong backbone of SMEs. So what happened with the CIG? It happens that in case of economic difficulties or external shocks, workers can receive a subsidized salary, which is up to 80% for the hours that are not worked, and it is valid for a period between 3 and 12 months. The amount usually is paid by the employer at the beginning, and later is reimbursed by the INPS, which is the Italian equivalent of the EPF. And this is a point that I'm going to question, the fact that the fund that is in charge for pensions has also to take care of a lot of other things. And this create a lot of troubles to the fund itself. And the CIG is financed by a monthly contribution from the gross payroll, and the percentage which is paid by the employer change according to the different economic sectors. So every month, the employer pays a certain amount of money to the INPS, and this money should be used in case of emergency to finance the subsidized wages. It looks good, but actually the general social protection in Italy is very costly. Consider that if the gross pay of an employee is 100, the net pay that falls into the employee's hands is between 45 and 65. I'm not sure if Malaysians would be happy to have such a deduction in the payroll. And this creates actually a huge burden on the INPS. So the INPS, which was originally created as a fund for financing pensions, is now taking care of all the things that are related with social protection. And consider that nowadays, INPS produce a debt of 7 to 8 billion euros per year. So even with very high taxation on the payroll, the funds used for multiple purposes have not proven to be economically sustainable. remember that all this money are financed with taxpayers' money. So there is no debt. In fact, currently, I think that the total debt of Italy is close to 140% of the GDP. Moreover, in the past, and this is very dangerous, this system has been used as a political weapon in the hands of big corporations. And this was in particular the case of Fiat, which is the Italian Proton, a very big company. Fiat was used to say to the government during the 80s and the 90s, listen, if you don't grant me this favor or this tender, I will place a certain number of workers under temporary unemployment, and you have to pay for it. And this is, of course, a weapon that small businesses cannot use, only big corporations. So this system, in general, became a supportive system for crony capitalism. And we had a way to say in Italy regarding Fiat, we are used to say that with Fiat, we have private profits and public losses. So when Fiat is in the black, the shareholder enjoy the benefit, but when they lose, the taxpayers have to finance their losses. And finally, there is a limited scope for small and medium enterprises. Now, I propose actually something that can resemble this for Malaysia, but with strong differences. So I think that would be useful to create a fund which works similarly like the EPF, so a pension style system in which the money invested there produce a return, but it is separate from the EPF. So becomes a dedicated fund like Tambun Haj, let's say, in which the money had to be used for this special purpose, which is the emergency, the temporary unemployment created in a moment of emergency. The management of the fund needs to be insurance style, so generate an income. And in this way, EPF can remain focused on retirement without the risk of crashing like it happens with INPS in Italy. In order to finance this fund, I propose a contribution via payroll, and then here we can discuss if this contribution should be compulsory for the workers or not. This can be the matter for debate. And we can imagine an employees and an employer's quota. And in order to incentivize the payment, this purpose payment both in the employees and in the employer, this amount can be made tax deducible. So is an additional withdrawal from your payroll, but that you can eventually retrieve or somehow you can enjoy a fiscal benefit by making it tax deducible. And I think that in this way, while in this moment we don't really have an offer from private insurance to provide substantial temporary unemployment relief, the creation of such a system by law can eventually nudge in favor of the creation of similar packages from private insurances. So we may eventually find ourselves in the possibility to have also private initiatives. And like for the pension, people could choose if make additional payments for temporary unemployment relief to private funds. The important thing is that this fund should be specifically used to subsidize wages in emergency moments only, and with the employer's commitment not to fire the employees. So this, of course, needs to remain clear. The main benefits of such a system would be that there is not an additional burden on existing government funds, like the EPF or the taxpayers' money, like it happened basically with this COVID emergency. The government had to intervene and somehow had to find the money for financing the pre-attempt packages. Borrowing money, using tax revenues, using existing funds, eventually go to Petronas, but the government had to create and to invent a system to finance the support. In this way, we would have at least partially already some sums allocated for the purpose. And indeed, the system would be specifically financed with specifically created contribution. At the same time, this system would nudge the private sector to enter the game, and eventually there would be the possibility for the worker and the employer to get back the money if the funds would not be utilized during the working life of the worker. What about the informal sector? In fact, this remain the big issue, but let's not forget what I just said, that in this current situation, the government had to find a way to finance a global support for the economy, both the formal and the informal sector. If we had specific funds already created to be allocated for the support in the formal sector, we could have more room for maneuver to help the informal sector. So the government should direct an exceptional intervention only to the informal sector, because the formal sector would have a way to finance itself in the emergency period. And this is all for part one. Part two, just a few words on social housing. I mentioned a lot in the past, in my past interventions, that government should not be a developer of housing, should step out of affordable housing and focus on social housing, developing a private-public partnership through what Jane Jacobs called the guarantee rent scheme. You can read my 2019 paper on housing policy to find the details of how this system eventually worked. So during a crisis, the existing of rent subsidies in special social housing would be at least a partial relief in urban environment for those people that eventually find themselves without the possibility to support their rent. That's all for my presentation. Later on, I will be available for questions. So I give back the words to Mr. Michael.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Carmelo. And next, I'd like to pass on the stage to Puan Balqais Yusoff. Puan Balqais Yusoff is Head of Strategy Management, Malaysia's Employment Fund, EPF. Over to you, Puan Balqais.
Thank you, Mr. Gay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see. Go ahead, Puan.
Okay. All right. Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon to everyone. And thank you to the organizer for inviting me. Today, I'll be presenting on some of the highlights about the Malaysia's social protection system. And my presentation is entitled Empowering Lives Through Stronger Social Protection. For everybody's information, I think everyone knows that COVID-19 crisis is without a doubt a human tragedy of epic proportions. No one country, no one nation, no one government or people of any nation that are spared from this phenomenal crisis. Some people have called it the global lockdown, simply because more than 80% of the world are being kept in some sort of shutdowns or lockdown or restricted movement. Some people have called it the Greater Depression because people are projecting that this will be far worse in terms of consequences, in terms of ramifications compared to the Great Depression in the 20th century, which happened in the 1920s. Some people call it the defining crisis of our time, the defining crisis of 21st century. But whatever we're going to call it, we know that COVID-19 and the pandemic is causing an enormous problems for society, for economies, for social developments, and human capital development. Yeah, there are a lot of business closures and people are losing jobs all over the world. If you look at this map, you can see that most of OECD countries are suffering double-digit losses in terms of GDP for the period of shutdowns. In the United States alone, for the first 5 weeks of the shutdown, there are more than 24 million social insurance claim. What it means is, for Malaysian, it's like the SOCSO claims for unemployment insurance. In Canada, the first 2 weeks of claim during shutdown is more than the whole 2019 combined. In United Kingdom, the increase in unemployment insurance claim is 10 times more. So we can see that this has caused very far-reaching consequences. On our home front, we are projecting more than 1 million job losses. There'll be a lot of businesses that will suffer, and we know from reports that businesses have only about 1 month of cash flow, before we actually uplifted the MCO recently. And we are also seeing that in terms of GDP, it was estimated a loss of between 12 to 18% for the period of shutdown that Malaysia experienced. Yeah, but so with all this happening around the world, we saw that a lot of governments are putting in enormous packages, massive packages for, stimulus package to support the people, to support the business. The United States recently announced 2.2 trillion. It's unheard of, right, for us? So these are numbers of unprecedented scale that the governments are trying to deploy in order to help livelihoods and also to help lives, save lives. The UK government spent to the tune of 330 billion, and our own government put on the table 260 billion altogether, although I must emphasize that direct government investment is around 35 billion altogether, right? So what is more important? Is it more important to save lives, or are livelihoods more important? So basically, I think we put value to both. If we don't save lives, the pandemic can spread and it can cause more multiple shutdowns, and that will affect the livelihoods. So therefore, tackling the public health issues are of paramount importance. But at the same time, we must recognize that people need to make income. Without income, they cannot survive. They cannot put food on the table. They cannot, with the shutdown, people can't go to school. People are denied of their rights to socialize. And that's why in the United States, you see mass protesters that go down on the street to fight for their freedom. But this is a philosophical question that we must ask ourselves, which one we want to prioritize during these unprecedented times. But I would like to also bring you to the fore some stories that COVID-19 had unearthed. This is a real person. She's a person who lives in Penang, and she's a 68-year-old grandmother and taking care of 3 grandchildren. Sadly, it's very heartbreaking for me to know the story of this family. The mother had passed away, the father left them, and the grandmother only sell kueh to make a living. And during the MCO, because they are the informal sector, they can't operate, right? People can't go to the street to sell kueh or any delicacies for the people. And the first grandchild suffered from congenital heart disease, the second one had leukemia, and the third one had 5 chronic diseases. I don't know how this person handled it. This is like a very large tragedy that's happening and befalling upon one family, and she only received zakat money of 400 ringgit. Definitely COVID-19 are bringing to the fore some of the problems that we probably ignored. We don't realize that people are suffering. So it's also putting a lot of challenges for many families. And also, the moment that the you know, the MCO was lifted, if you see social media, people are queuing, you know, queuing in front of the pawn shops. This is just an embodiment of how people are struggling to make ends meet, and they just want to survive and put food on the table. This is a very, very sad state of affairs for me. And the question that I want to ask is, are we not doing enough for our people? Are there not enough savings that people are making on their own? Or are there any gaps in the current social protection system, or is our minimum wage or wage structure in this country needs to be questioned? Now, before we can blame COVID-19 for anything, I think let's just look at pre-COVID-19 situation. Malaysian households are already struggling. If you look at EPF database, more than 86% are earning below 4,000 a month. Yeah, and if you earn more than 10,000, you're top 5%. I know, I'm telling you, because I'm from the EPF. And because people make very low wages, and these are also people in the structured employment, what more of those people who are in the informal sector, whose income are very irregular, not consistent, you know, they are not guaranteed of a certain payment. When people have low wages or low income, that translates into high absolute poverty or high relative poverty rates. What does that mean, absolute poverty? We have today 1 million people living in absolute poverty. That means they are just barely making 1,000 ringgit. You cannot even make ends meet. You cannot pay for clothing, clothes, shelter, and the basic necessities such as food, to put food on the table. And to top it up, we have between 16 to 20% of households living under relative poverty. And these are groups that they can make ends meet, but when there is shock, like a crisis like COVID-19, or, you know, they have a punctured tire or somebody needs to go to the hospital, they cannot afford it. Just like Mr. Kun told us the stories of the Orang Asli, Malaysians roughly have about 1 month of income to survive, you know, with the shutdown. And because of low wages, high relative poverty, it is no wonder that we have a very high household debt to GDP. It's among the highest in the world. And if you look at savings, Malaysia also does not have a very good saving culture. We have about 1.3% of GDP in terms of savings rate. And if you take out the EPF, is in the minus region. So definitely that reflects that either households don't make enough to save, or we just like to spend. Okay, now going back to the thing that we saw among households, now let's look at individuals. Across life cycles, from children to adults to elderly, we see vulnerabilities. Children are actually very vulnerable group, and today we have about 2 million children living in relative poverty, and 2.5 million, out of 5 children in Malaysia are suffering from stunting. What does that mean? Stunting is just not about being not tall. It is about cognitive development. It's about being able to perform as a human capital. It's about, contributing to the nation, because these are future talents. At the same time, among children, 14,000 school dropouts every year because Malaysia does not make high school compulsory. So that's a phenomenal amount of number of kids that are not going to school. At the same time, when you look at adults, also people in skilled areas are only about 20% of the labor force. The rest are non-skilled labor. At the same time, 60% of the Malaysian adults of working age are not covered by any statutory contributions, because the EPF covers roughly around 30%, and the other 10% are from the civil servants. So we have a huge coverage gap. And if you look at EPF database as well, more than 50% of our people are earning below the living wage. This is based on a study that the EPF did together with the University of Malaya. And among the elderly, we see similar problems. The elderly are very vulnerable. They don't make an income anymore, especially after a certain age. If you look at the elderly group, 60% of them fall in the B40. And then when you are old, not only you are associated with health decline, physical abilities decline. You're also facing cognitive decline and performance decline. So therefore, you can't perform as best as you can. And because of that, we see also based on our studies by the EPF, 50% of the people who saved in EPF, they finished their money within 5 to 10 years. And more of our members are saying that 70% of them depends on their families for income support. So COVID-19 comes, and what does it do to our society? Definitely, it's just going to perpetuate and aggravate the situation of poverty. It's going to put more households into poverty. It's going to bring more individuals into the relative poverty or even hardcore poverty as people lose jobs. According to high estimate, a total of 2.4 million jobs will be losses. And there's also about more than 2 million out of the informal sector will be out of jobs, especially if you hear the government's announcement, the bazaars, the pasar tani, the informal sector, you can't open it yet. They are in the negative list. And 46% of people in the informal sectors, they are not covered by anything at all. And they don't have SOCSO, they don't have EPF, they can't withdraw from the ILSTRI. So people are losing income, and 35% of the self-employed claim a drop of 90% of their income, and 71% say that they can only last for 1 month. Yes, Prihatin came and helped them, but how long can Prihatin last? Because it's a one-off support. At the same time, households are also facing numerous pressures on health issues, mental health, as incidents of abuse are on the rise, as people are being locked down and not being able to go to work. Women are also part of this group suffering. And I think the Malaysian government has done a phenomenal job at trying to protect people, at trying to protect jobs. We have spent to the tune of 250-60 billion ringgit to help both households and jobs. We've got the moratorium, we've got the exemptions on certain statutory declarations, deferments. So I think these are measures that are being done by various countries as well. Like giving interest-free loans or given access to grants and stuff like that. In countries like Japan, they also encourage businesses to move to IR 4.0 or digital transformation by giving grants to organizations, because I believe that COVID-19 is going to accelerate the digital transformation. There are many good things that digital transformation can bring, and also COVID-19 brings to the fore many things that we maybe have been put on the back burner. We are not getting enough attention. Issues like climate change, issues like inequality is bringing to the fore the gaps in our social security, is bringing to the fore the importance of having universal healthcare system. And we can thank SOCSO also for having the employment insurance. There are many good things, but there are definitely gaps in our country. Yeah. So for many countries, especially the advanced economies, they already have a very developed social protection system that are in place to give benefits for unemployment, give benefits for children, give benefits for old age, and many more. And when the crisis like the COVID-19 comes to play, they only give an extra. So they call this a social safety net. But in Malaysia, we have a bit of a fragmented system. While we have many things, our challenges in Malaysia are 4 things. We have a fragmented system. Number 2, our coverage are not sufficient. We don't cover everybody. Thirdly, the adequacy of our social protection are not adequate and not sufficient. And lastly, the sustainability of it. So let me go into issue number 1, fragmentation. We spent around 27 billion, and that's quite a good amount, but we spent it across 120 programs. It's not very focused and covering 21 ministries. And based on our study, there are also a very high exclusion and inclusion error. At the same time, the coverage of Malaysians are not very high because, as I had mentioned before, between EPF and SOCSO, we cover around 30 to 40% of Malaysian adults, housewives, informal sectors, they are not covered, right? We have some assistance for the very, very hardcore poor, but they are bottom 1%. So what happens to the rest? Yeah, definitely the B40 received some bantuan prihatin nasional, and so did the M40, but it's a one-off. Yeah, so if you look at informal sector also, many of them are not mandated to cover. And if you look at the entire spectrum of Malaysian adults, about 12 million are outside the scope of EPF and SOCSO. In terms of adequacy, EPF has been saying that only 1 out of 3 EPF members meet the basic savings, and 1 in 2 EPF members finish their money within 5 years. And in Malaysian context, compared to Dr. Carmelo's country, only 200,000 people are receiving an old age pension. The rest, if they finish their EPF, they have nothing. They only have their families to support. While we are spending a lot, you can see that we spend a lot. But if you look at social assistance program, if you look at healthcare, if you look at labor market interventions, Malaysia is slightly underspending in terms of GDP compared to both OECD countries as well as the global average. So now, let's look at the issues that are more closer to me because I come from the EPF. Malaysia has around 23 million working adults, and about 10 million are in the formal sector, about 5.6 million in the informal sector, and 7.4 million are outside the labor force. And even with the formal sector, we have about only 7 million members who are active, and 1.6 million people who are in the civil servants. So there are people maybe who are under contract and not really making payment to the EPF. Of course, the informal sector, there's 5.6 million people, they are not covered at all. And like Dr. Carmelo's mentioned, about more than 1.4 million self-employed are not even registered with SSM or even local councils. Yeah, so we definitely have some challenges. We are not perfect, but we know that Rome is not built in a day, and a journey of 1,000 steps begin with a single step. So therefore, we've got to make the right steps, right? So basically, before I even go back to solution, I'd like to bring us back to fundamentals. In 1948, there was this declaration, United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, that state that everyone, every citizen of any country deserve a right to social security, and is entitled to realization through both national and international cooperation to get access to social security. And if you look at Article 22 and 24, it is about giving people work and paying people fairly and giving people fair, leisure time. At the same time, Article 24, which is very relevant to us today, is a right to health, well-being, medical care, and other services covered in the well-being component, right? So how does that translate? So technically, when we have a state and a citizen relationship, there is a social contract. For a certain, we as citizens, we forego some freedom in order to get some benefits from the state, and the state through public and private measures must give us access to shelter, access to health, income security, nutrition, education, and mobility. These 6 core components for me form the very essence of what was encapsulated, what was enshrined and espoused by Articles 26 right through Article 27. So in order to deliver a well-being for the nation, in order to make Malaysia become a high-income nation where every citizen can lead a purposeful and meaningful life, we need to be able to provide affordable homes. We need to be able to provide access to healthcare that is universal, make sure that people have income, so on and so forth. Yeah. So like the quality and nutritious food is very, very significant because these are future talents. These are going to make people of the future tomorrow, right? So what is social security? I think for many experts, we know what social security is all about, but for many people who are maybe new to this arena, I would just like to say that social security in definition is a protection that society provides for its members through a series of both public and private measures. Yeah, so public and private measures can be the NGOs, can also be corporates that are providing social security to us, like giving us medical care through employment-based social security. And this guarantee will protect the society against both economic and social distress in the event of stoppage of income. So what are the areas that social security covers? Yeah, social security covers 9 branches. Yeah, so if I can say them: sickness, unemployment, medical care, family, old age, employment injury, maternity, invalidity, as well as survivors benefits. These are things that are being mentioned in ILO convention, both ILO recommendation 101 and 202, whereby citizens need to be able to be protected from all these mishaps or risk. Yeah, because if you look at your life cycle, we face all these life events, and we may be sick, we may be unemployed, we may be old, and therefore we deserve protection. If you look at the history, the Islamic history, actually the structured social security or the formal social security was founded in the second caliphate of the Islamic civilization. If you research history, it was Umar al-Khattab that brought social security, whereby they give universal child care, they give universal child benefits for old age in terms of pension, those who are unemployed, and family benefits. So there is no reason why Malaysia or any other countries can't push for this best practice. So in order for you to remember the 9 branches, I always mention to my colleagues, just remember this mnemonic: SAM, FO, MIS, if you read that, right? Just to help people. Okay, now, definitely when you get your social security or social protection right, we will have reduced poverty, we'll be able to manage vulnerabilities across life cycle, will be able to reduce inequality, promote an inclusive and social development, as well as promoting social coherence and stability. So in order to deliver all the areas of the 6 areas that I mentioned just now, there are 3 approaches to social protection in the form of social assistance, social insurance, and labor market interventions. I think Malaysia does social assistance, but we only focus on the hardcore poor, right? So I think we can do more there. And for social insurance here, we are only covering those who are in the structured employment. So we could do more. We could cover more people through various mechanisms using government, private sector, and others to help contribute for those who are in vulnerable groups. And the thirdly, which is the labor market interventions, we are doing that in terms of wage subsidy that SOCSO is doing, but there are more things that we could do through job markets, placements, and stuff like that. So in order to address the current gap, so while Dr. Ferlito look at some short-term measures, I think what I'm proposing here is looking at a bit of a longer-term measures for Malaysia. So number 1, the strategic approach should be to strengthen the social assistance framework for our country. Yeah. Number 2 is to reform the social insurance, strengthen the pensions and retirement framework, because we are trying to get sustainability as well at the system level. Number 3 is about getting labor market more active and inclusive. Like for instance, labor participation of women in Malaysia is only 55%. With work from home that is enabled through COVID-19, now more women can participate in the labor force. After all, women are part of the vulnerable groups. Yeah. And fourthly, of course, to coordinate and get data. Agencies, ministries need to get data across and share, because without data, we cannot see who's vulnerable. Without data, we cannot see and make evidence-based policies. So let's look at social assistance. What can we do there? We would like to propose for a universal coverage for all children. Children are vulnerable groups. They don't make an income. But when you help children, technically you're helping the parents, you're helping the households, because they will be living in those households, and parents become less stressed because they get the child grant. Yeah, there's no reason why we can't do it, because I think in Europe and Central Asia, 87% of the children are being covered. In the Americas, 66% of children are given the children grants. In Asia, it's only 26%. It's not a culture in this part of the region. The elderly pension also. 80 countries have social pension. So we should be recognizing the elderly in our country. They have contributed to us. They have been part of the various, crises. They have been part of the independence. So it's about time that we celebrate them. We celebrate women who are underrepresented in the formal sector as well. So persons with abilities, we need to strengthen the social assistance through non-contributory and tax-funded system. So that's number one. Recommendation number two is to strengthen the EPF and SOCSO framework and looking at broadening the coverage of EPF and SOCSO. So now we need to cover more people and mandate or get automatic enrollment for the informal sector, like farmers, nelayan, the fishermen. If they cannot afford it, we can have a government interventions there and covering both EPF and SOCSO. So when they have like crops, failure of crops, they can claim for health or for crops insurance because they cannot make their living that month, or when they have a heavy rainfall for the fishermen, they can also claim that. So there are various people across a broad spectrum, like professionals who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are also not part of the EPF and SOCSO framework. Who's to say that if I'm rich today, I will be able to sustain myself? Even if I'm a neurosurgeon, doesn't mean that I know how to manage my life cycle risk, right? Because if we make bad investments, we could lose everything. So with framework like SOCSO and EPF, we can broaden it to include more people, but through various other means of interventions, not necessarily just the individual themselves. Also, we're proposing like maybe we can make a lower contributory rate to cater for the informal sector. And thirdly, we'd like to propose like a job placement portal, giving grants to workers now, especially under the lockdown, to uptake the certification in digital skills and data and other things, encouraging TVET type of skill sets that are more future oriented, that is more geared towards the future economy, because COVID-19, post-COVID-19, the new normal will be totally different. The new skills required will be totally different. And last but not least, I mentioned data. I think we need data to identify where is the orang asli. We need to make everyone to come on board. We should practice non-discrimination, be it foreign workers, be it orang asli. Any person born in this country must have documentation, must not be denied any rights to education, healthcare, or even any statutory-based contributions or benefits. So now, our strategy is to look at the life cycle risk. If I were to mention, we need a minimum standard of living, and this is what we call the living wage income. But across life cycle, we can see that children, they have no income. For adult, let's say when you're a child, you have no income, you work, you have some income, you get married and have a child, boom, your income cannot sustain for 3 people. It was making ends meet before, and now you become under poverty. So you also become impoverished, or you could also lose your job, and then you get your job again, your wife works, and you're okay. And then when you become old, you can't make an income anymore because we don't know whether you can really contribute. There's only a small percentage of people that can continue to work after the age of 70. Believe me, because most people, especially in the informal sector, is very laborious, the semi-skilled, they cannot work anymore. And therefore, when we give social assistance, you aim to bring up everyone to the blue line here. Yeah. So every woman deserves the maternity allowance. Today, only women in the formal sector that gets it. So if I am working as a kuih seller, I should be able to claim maternity benefits as well from the state. That's what we're proposing. I think everyone deserves the right. And if you look at social protection floor under universal coverage, we are supposed to give these benefits to our citizens. Yeah. If you look at it also, many countries are doing social pensions and stuff like that. So now, we are proposing a multi-pronged approach because EPF alone is not going to sustain you. So let's say if I am an older person in Malaysia, I will get a social pension here. I will also be able to claim from my EPF with some regular payouts. And if I have my own saving. So imagine how beautiful it is. We have multi-layering of income. Yes, when you look at individual efforts, it's not a lot, but when you combine those efforts, we are looking at 3 levels of protection. With this, we hope that Malaysians can live a dignified life. We want Malaysians to all, be able to reach a quality of living that befits us as we approach high income nation. I do not want to be proud of a country with high income nation, but we see a lot of homelessness. I do not want to see my brothers and my sisters suffering. The answers are with us Malaysians, and we must push for this reform together because we can make our country better, and there's no one else that can help us but us. Yeah. So I believe in the near future, some of the thinking that we are promoting may be irrelevant as digital transformation will change the outlook of the future. As we become more digitalized, business models are set to change, social norms, social behaviors, purchasing behaviors, how people consume, that will change forever. And what do you make of social protection? The social protection today was made in the 19th century for a young population. It is not geared for an aged population. Do we now tax the rich? Do we go for universal basic income? Do you tax robots? Zero tax? These are all philosophical questions that will be the next thinking that we need to start talking. And I hope for my fellow Malaysians to talk about social protection, to talk about social security, to bring to attention retirement areas and protection about workers' rights to the fore. We need to have those discussions now. The time to act is now. So with that, I thank you. That's all from the EPF. Over to you, Michael.
Wow. Wow, I'm really amazed and happy to be a Malaysian. Yeah, after hearing such an amazing, can you hear me? Yeah, such an amazing presentation by Puan Balqais. Actually, in Malaysia, I noticed that our first move when COVID hit us was Malaysia went into the automatic loan moratorium. And that, as a first move, really helped Malaysia. Don't you think so, everybody?
Yes.
All the panel here? I think it's world class because even Singapore and Thailand and Indonesia, in Indonesia, the car there was a moratorium of 12 months, but the car loan you have to apply, and in Singapore and in Thailand you have to apply. It is there, but you have to apply, and then you deny or not deny. But in Malaysia, it's automatic. I think we have to thank our finance ministry and government for this first mover move. Next, as a person, I like everybody here to consider that actually we are very lucky to have a reasonable lifestyle, live a reasonable lifestyle in Malaysia, wherever you are. And I'm very happy that we have many institutions that have many billions on our hands to a structure a products that need now, especially at this moment. Okay. And what about ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, everybody? Are we living on high debt? Do we enjoy ourselves by having a high cost living? Think about it. There are a lot of things in our life we don't really need. And maybe with less, if we can live more without high debt, I think that is much better. I think 1-2 months not surviving financially is not good. We should have reserved at least 3 months or more. So without further more delay, we'd like to invite some questions. Mr. Voon, do we have questions from everybody out there?
Yeah, I think we can open the floor for Q&A. If you have any questions, can you please introduce yourself, mention which organization you're from, and we would like to take the Q&A over over Zoom chat instead of putting it on audio. So if you have any questions, you can please type it down in chat, and we will take your questions from there. We do have hands up from a Tantip Amon Prapawat. Would it be possible to type down your questions for the benefit of the panel? And if the rest of the attendees have any questions as well, you also can type down your questions and we will try to answer as many as we can. In the meantime, maybe among the panel members, we can actually ask each other. Maybe Mr. Gay, you can ask the panel a few questions to the panel, or what kind of issues they might have left out, and what kind of things they want to cover.
Not to us, but to I think everybody was very clear on each person's. It really struck me with awesome because Mr. Kon, really goes into the jungle, and I don't know how long it took for you to. How long did you have to go into the jungle to wait there? That the orang asli came out in 1 hour. How long did it took for you to get there?
We were coming on this day and time, so the community was already prepared, but this particular family, we were took an hour to come to where we were just distributing the food, so it wasn't too long. But it's just shocking. I mean, it's just not that village, but even in Perak, I was asking another community that was asking it for help. In the deep forests of Perak, you thought they would have adequate resources to be resilient through this lockdown and lack of food access. But even they were asking for help. So so a lot of their forests is no longer the same as before. It's badly affected, that they no longer are able to enjoy the food security that they have had in the past. So that was shocking to me. That was really shocking.
Any questions?
Michael, may I have a question if it's possible? I was very impressed with Puan Balqais' presentation and a very radical thinking of how to restructure EPF and the social aid. As amazing thoughts behind it. But I suppose my question is, great ideas. Love the direction and the ideas behind it. But how does Malaysia? How would Malaysia be able to raise enough finances to do all of that? Creating social SOCSO for the poor, not just the poorest, but for example, the orang asli. I mean, if that could be created, that would provide another very strong social net for the vulnerable.
I think one way is to redirect some of the fragmented, aids and assistance that we are giving today and sometimes it doesn't really get directly to the beneficiaries or the recipients. It goes through a channel. So the administrative cost of also doing massive targeting is also another issue. So therefore, if you remove the administrative cost, you also redirect some of the funding currently being given to other social assistance benefits. You can then channel some to these efforts. Secondly, we can also look at raising some tax for the super abled in order to also redistribute the wealth a little bit more, because if you see Malaysia in terms of Gini coefficient, we are about 0.43 before any transfers, but after transfers we only improve our inequality by 0.02. It comes down to 0.41. So therefore there needs to be more progressive income tax, perhaps, but not to increase too much, because our taxpayers base is also very, very small. Yeah, we only have about 2.5 million taxpayers trying to support 30 million Malaysians. So definitely there needs to be more people paying to the pot, raising income tax a little bit. That's not going to raise a lot, but I think post-COVID, when you have more structured economy with the growth trajectory, we should be able to carve out a proportion of our revenue into the social assistance pot, because when you spend, there's also consumption, and that creates multiplier effect, and that will also help boost further the economic activities as well.
Awesome. Looks like nobody's questioning, so they must be very clear. Your slides must be very clear. I like to then perhaps go back one round before we close today's meeting. Yeah. So, Mr. Kon, any last words or your last takes or one loud commentary on filling the gaps? Any one strong recommendation by you, Mr. Kon, for now?
I think, particularly for the maybe I speak more for the Orang Asli and the rural poor, particularly the small scale producers. It was interesting. Even after COVID, or rather, sorry, during the after the first lockdown and then the second lockdown, a lot of these smallholders and some of these farmers were having to dump their products. They were losing income and they were losing their products. The private sector came in very quickly to come in with online marketing and try to take on some of the produce. But simply, it was very clear the supply chain mechanism was not able to cater for many of them. And then pharma, of course, came in with it, setting up distribution centers. So it mitigated to some extent. But we have a double problem here. One is the small-scale producers who have very small savings are pretty badly hurt in this process. Secondly, food was not getting to the people where it was needed. And so you had a double crisis resulting from this lockdown. So I would say, they were made more vulnerable, these communities, and particularly the Orang Asli even more so, because the ecosystem of preparing their supply chain mechanisms and access to fair markets was already weak. So if the way forward, I think, to reduce their vulnerability and social nets of protection of sorts, is to put in more investments to develop infrastructure for these rural community through roads, warehouse, storage centers, bringing down the cost of logistics and production down so that they can enjoy better profits, and therefore able then to contribute towards SOCSO or EPF and take on what Puan Balqais said, maybe begin to allocate sums into those areas where they can enjoy these social protection nets. and they can do so much better. And thirdly, the last reason why it's so important, so to me, it's so critical. The agriculture sector actually has a multiplier effect of probably 3 to 4 times in terms of creating jobs and GDP, because your product sold when bought from the market from the farmers is say 5 ringgit per kilo. By the time it goes to the market, marketed at the retail centers, is probably 15 ringgit per kg. So it's created much more opportunities, jobs for many, many more. And so if we see the potential of the agriculture as a primary driver of growth and creation of, there's an even greater need to create social protection for them so that we can have a healthier society for all. So that's my parting shot.
Thank you. Dr. Carmelo, can I invite a one strong a recommendation from you on this topic, Dr. Carmelo?
Yes, 2 things. First of all, remember that each kind of system that will be designed for social safety net needs to be sustainable. Monies don't fall down from the trees. Okay, so many things can look beautiful, but together with beauty, we need sustainability. Otherwise, we end up in a debt trap like many developed countries. Second point related to this, in economics, 2 very important things are often not considered: trade-offs and unintended consequences. Before designing a very highly redistributional system, think about the trade-offs that you are going to create. Because if the price that I pay for redistribution is that businesses are driven out of Malaysia, then I don't get more help for the poor, but I get less help because jobs will be lost. So trade-offs and unintended consequences. Often when policies are designed, we tend not to look at the importance and the relevance of unintended consequences.
Thank you, Dr. Carmelo. Puan Yusoff, Puan Balqais, I see your slides are very good in the direction, but any 2 loud comments on what can be done immediately today to for that maybe the society can do, you know, with this ongoing COVID-19. Puan Balqais, yeah.
Thank you. Basically, I also want to follow Dr. Carmelo. 2 things. Number 1 thing is I would like for Malaysians to start having conversation, to start having dialogues around, you know, these issues that are of paramount importance. Start thinking about retirement today. Start thinking about protecting ourselves and our family, saving more. You know, like Mr. Michael said, we need to have at least 6 months of our salary in order to survive any emergency. So use the moratorium period to save up for the 6 months emergency period. You know, you cannot afford to have like 96% of Malaysians saying that they only have they can survive for 1 month. You know, there's something wrong with that picture. So I think because the moratorium, the government give us a breather, take that opportunity to save up more and prepare for emergency. Yeah, so that's number 1 thought, and also to start having conversation around social security, around retirement and pension. And the second part for me, because I'm from the EPF, I will have to say this. I would like for, you know, my fellow Malaysians to start saving more, to put more into the EPF, although you are a salaried, you know, person, but you can do a top up to 60,000 ringgit per year on your own. So do that up, because although EPF gives you a stable dividend over time, when you compound that over 30 years, we will outperform many of the double digit that gives a, you know, on principle. So time works like magic, so put your money, especially for the youngsters out there watching. If you're in your 20s, if you save just 600 ringgit a month, you will be a millionaire by 55. If you're in your 30s, you need about 1,000. Put 1,000 ringgit into EPF on top of what the company put for you. Then you'll be 3-4 million. But if you just put that 1,000, if you're self-employed, 1,000 if you're in your 30s, you'll be a millionaire by the age of 55. So I want to encourage Malaysians to save. If you don't need to withdraw from EPF, don't, because we can really double up the value or triple the value for you over time. So with that, I thank you and continue to support us. We want to give the best for Malaysians. Thank you so much.
One, I support you with 2 more points on EPF. Yeah. One is that it is tax-free, correct? Upon withdrawal, it is tax-free, tax-free income, tax-free interest by EPF. Second point is it is compounded, and from financial planning point of view, rule of 7, every 7 years it doubles, okay? So that is my mentioning for supporting contributions to the EPF. I like to say that I do find Malaysia, we are very lucky in this country because we have the first mover response of loan moratorium, and with grants to SMEs. I know some of the grants are not really dispersed yet, but I believe it's coming on the way. And second is that we are actually ahead in Asia by today, and by I chat with my FIABCI regional talks. A lot of other countries are still struggling with COVID today. The curve haven't flattened yet. We are talking about going back to work already, and it is a real blessing. And for everybody, think about this high debt. Yes, I'm in the property sector. I'm a property valuer, a consultant by profession. I do find that we live in a very high debt and with high living cost environment. Do consider, your current lifestyle, and see whether we must not let us ourselves be hit by another. Doesn't have to be a pandemic, it can be. I hope this COVID woke us up, woke us up, and let's be able to face all eventualities. Okay, back to you, Vun.
Thank you, Mr. Gay, and thank you to our panel speakers. I think it's the role of think tanks like KSI and ideas. We need to compile this kind of points. We will come up with the report and recommendations, and we'll keep making noise. I think the controversial thing about social protection is it's always political. It's always politicized. And although this may not be the panel to discuss it here, to get true reforms like the ones that the speakers have been mentioning, it requires a lot of discussion. It requires awareness. It requires understanding from the ground in order to develop the political will to push through some of these things. Some of the things that the one that Balqais has mentioned, like increasing tax, that requires education. That requires understanding from the ground before people can decide to vote for the politician that want to champion these kind of things, for example. And it's not, and it's true from what Dr. Ferlito and Balqais and Mr. Korn has mentioned. It's not just one component by itself, but this kind of, to have a robust social protection system, every piece needs to be in place for it to work properly. So thank you all for your points today, and we also thank you very much for taking the time off, especially for our attendees who've sacrificed their time. It's just a few hours to book up Puasa, and we just want to thank you for just making the time available to be with us in this discussion. Before we log off, I would just like to ask the speakers to remain behind. Don't log off first. I will be stopping the broadcast. I'd just like to have a short chat before we go. So to our viewers on Facebook Live and on Zoom, We thank you very much for your participation here today. We do have one last question actually. How do you? I think we cannot take questions anymore. We are over time already. I'm so sorry about that. Perhaps we can respond to you after offline. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. We'll be ending the broadcast and have a good Thursday. Friday. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend.